Alright, welcome everyone. We are kicking off our show called Meta Musings. Now, this is a show with me and Sotere where we're gonna basically talk about the current meta, things that might change, things that we might want to see changed, and basically, the meta is always changing because of new patches. Things are always getting nerfed or getting buffed, and it's basically a way for you guys to keep up and really stay ahead of the curve.
Indeed. And I love the meta, and I love how it's, grown to the point it is, but I feel like a lot of the pro teams are kind of stagnated in the sense that M5 has said, on record, oh, I think the meta is as good as it's going to get. I think this is the optimal way to play the game. And on one hand, I agree. I like how the meta is set up, but I still feel like you can gain an advantage over people that are so, stuck in their own perception of how this meta should be by just changing up a little bit so that they have a disadvantage.
So, basically, to introduce ourselves, we are with GG Chronicle. We are both casters and writers for GG Chronicle. And I, myself, am a low elo scrub compared to Sotir, although Sotir dropped elo recently due to the riot patch fiasco or whatever that was.
Right keeps on telling me, like, at first they're like, okay, we're gonna fix it, and then they're like, here's a 10-win bonus. Like, of course everyone got a 10-win IP bonus, but I got an extra 10-win IP bonus because they're like, oh, we understand we deleted some of your stuff. And then Wild Child, who's one of the support people, was like, oh, I'm sorry, we can't fix your elo. And I'm like, are you kidding me? So I sent in like 10 more support tickets, and was like, let me talk to your management. And they're finally like, okay, we're gonna fix this. And I also apparently noticed Saint Vicious lost all of his runes or something along those lines. So it was like, and one of the Riot people actually tweeted, and they were like, okay, don't worry, Saint Vicious, we're really working hard to fix that. I was like, are you working hard to fix my elo? Because, like, on the one hand, I'm still kind of a scrub. Like, I'm like 2050 elo. But on the other hand, like, it took me 400 games to get up there, which is like 260 hours, and I quit my job as an attorney to get up there and to like try to make this a profession. So I'm like, this is serious business, guys. I could get up there again, but I don't want to spend like 2 months trying to climb elo. I wanna be up there. I want to be part of the scene, and I want to tell people what they should do, and that's part of the show. We're talking about how you should play the game.
Yep. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the Deathfire Grasp. Deathfire Grasp was changed a few patches. It's been a while, actually, about a month or so, I think, since it's been changed.
Yeah, it has been a while. We intended to, shoot off the show a little bit earlier, got a little bit delayed. I was moving, you were moving. It's summertime, everyone's enjoying the weather. But still, we don't see too many people taking advantage of the change.
Yep, so basically, it was changed so that it's basically just an ability power, it has CDR, and it has that unique active, which is very powerful. And, I mean, because it removed the mana component of Deathfire Grasp, it suddenly became more viable on AP champions that don't use mana. And I think the one that Sotir really wanted to, or liked a lot, was on Mordekaiser.
Yeah, I like Mordekaiser, but like after we talked about Mordekaiser, I realized that almost all of the non-mana AP champions have some sort of great synergy with it. Mordekaiser has a great synergy because, of course, if you can Deathfire Grasp, maybe Siphon, use your ultimate and ignite, you can insta-kill an AP carry, or an AD carry rather, and then you have a free ghost, which is huge in a teamfight battle. So he has a synergy in that sense, but other people that have a synergy that's actually more directly related to their skills, Vladimir, of course, gets that extra damage bonus from Hemoplague.
Yeah, and the thing is, Hemoplague doesn't do immediate damage, so it actually synergizes well with the fact that it does a portion of the maximum health. So you Hemoplague,
right.
and then it does no damage, but it does the additional, it adds on additional, like 15% extra damage, and
it's lower than that. It used to be 18%. It used to be crazy. Then it was 14. Now I think it's like 12 amplified damage.
Oh, is it 12?
But I mean,
okay.
it's still
Yeah,
it's still big. I mean, I'm not sure of the exact number, but it has been nerfed a number of times because I kept on realizing, oh my goodness, this is actually a really big ultimate, great for team fights. So they kept on trying to nerf it. But it's lower than it was, so I think it's around 12 to 13 or so.
Yeah, I mean, with just your runes and masteries and with just Deathfire Grasp, Vladimir should be able to just do a third of the enemy champion's health with just the Deathfire Grasp, and then he has his other spells too, and the damage from the actual Hemoplague. So
Right.
it's a great item on him if you want to do more single target burst damage.
Yeah, and I actually looked it up. It is 12% extra damage for 5 seconds to all targets. So that's what made it great in teamfights, Hemoplague in particular. But even in a single target battle, if you Hemoplague and then Ignite and then Deathfire Grasp, that's a lot more damage than people will be regularly expecting from that combination. So that's certainly great. But of course, the great thing about Deathfire Grasp is also it builds out of Kage's Lucky Pick, which I've also heard is KGs, or there's a number of different pronunciations, and I'm not settling on one. I'm just going to call it a number of them every single time. Um, oh my goodness. So I think we just started recording because I'm terrible at this game and terrible at own broadcasting.
Well, I mean, I have it on my computer too, so I can just upload that.
Okay, we'll upload that. Regardless, not only are you getting a great item for any non-AP champion, but you're also getting the fact that you're making that GP10 money in the meanwhile, which kind of leads to how do you want to build your champion? Because, of course, if you build straight into Deathfire Grasp, then you may be missing out on the gold that you could be earning over time. But when you are a Mordekaiser, even when you're a Katarina, who we haven't talked about yet, who also synergizes really well with Deathfire Grasp, because her passive gives her reduced cooldowns upon assists or kills, so obviously killing one target is really essential to her, so she can use Shumpo, so she can use Bouncing Blade another time. So while you don't think it directly synergizes, because she's not a single target burst damage dealer for the most part, once she gets that kill, she starts kind of steamrolling, kind of like an APE. Now, but you have that fact, how long do you want to keep the GP10 item? Do you want to keep it, just in the intermediary while you're building up that Deathfire Grasp? Or are you like Mordekaiser, are you like Vladimir, that you have an intermediary item that you want to build, such as a Will of the Ancients, or maybe an Abyssal Scepter, which is really gaining ground, or both of those champions also like Rylai's Crystal Scepter. So you have like a lot of options that you can build in between, and then once you build that Deathfire Grasp, you can really put out that damage. And that being said, I've been in games where I'm like, why didn't they build Deathfire Grasp earlier? Because with Mordekaiser especially, I feel like, if he gets a Siphon of Destruction on and an Ignite, Deathfire Grasp, and, Children of the Grave, which is his ultimate, I'm pretty sure that's the name of it.
Yeah, I think so.
That is like almost an insta-kill on an AD carry who is probably 2 levels behind and doesn't have any defenses. And it's just a ridiculous team fight changer. Of course, you have to be within range, which is like, 550, 560, 600, somewhere around there. But it is such a huge burst combination that you're not really expecting from Mordekaiser or Vladimir or even Katarina, because previously they hadn't been building that Deathfire Grasp.
Yep. So, yeah, and I mean, it's really, you mentioned a lot of the things that I was thinking about. Basically, it adds a lot of burst. The active is very good. It just basically adds a second ultimate to the champion, and it gives champions more burst than they previously had. I mean, before the change, I think Veigar was really the only champion that people built Deathfire Grasp on. And, I mean, he was the quintessential burst champion. But now I think a lot more champions have the ability to do a lot more burst damage because of the change to Deathfire Grasp.
It's interesting, because I also think they tried to nerf it a little bit, because I believe they took it down from 30% of current health to 25, but then they boosted the percent per ability power from 3% to 4%. So for the most part, I feel like it was a nerf until you get a lot of AP. But that being said, it's just been so effective for so long, people just didn't even realize it. The one interesting thing about Veigar is he loved it because he actually really, really needed the AP bonus, or not the AP bonus, the mana regeneration bonus, in addition to all the other factors that the item gave, whereas a lot of other champions didn't need so much mana regen, and Veigar was struggling with it. But that being said, you look at the item now, 80 ability power, 15% cooldown reduction, and of course the passive, so no more mana regen, so it actually hurts champions that were buying it for that dual purpose of burst and mana regen, like Veigar.
Yeah. And I was just thinking about, because we're thinking about all these champions that don't have mana that might synergize well with Deathfire Grasp, and I think Kennen was really the only one that I thought wouldn't really benefit from it that much, because I mean that's not really what Kennen would do. But I mean, what other AP champions are there that don't use mana?
Those are the only ones I can think of off the top of my head. But I have to say, Kennen is not a bad selection, and I have seen actually for a really long time people going GB10 Kennen just because of the fact that you can build him with the Kages and you can build him with a Heart of Gold and whatever you want to build him with, and he will still be able to outfarm people in lane because his laning is really, really stellar. The other thing to note though is his burst is incredible. When I play Morgana, most people I'm not really worried about the burst of because I can shield off a large portion of it with Black Shield. But when you go against a Kennen, if you get in range of his Slicing Maelstrom ultimate, he is going to kill you through your shield, provided he gets those stuns off. So, he is a person that, of course, is mainly used for his AoE ultimate and his utility in team fights, but in lane and through the middle to early game can be really deadly just one-on-one with that same ultimate. So if you add Deathfire Grasp into that, it just means you're going to die that much quicker. Those fights aren't going to be as close. Because I've been a number of times surprised by how much damage that really does, even if you're the only one stuck in it.
So yeah, I mean, it's a really good item, and it's not. I mean, it did get more expensive with the. I don't know. How much was the cost before compared to now? Do you remember?
I don't remember really. It doesn't seem like it was a big change. Apparently, it's reduced from 2600 from 2610 to 2600.
Oh, okay.
So
yeah, so it's
and
not. It's not exactly. It's not a ridiculously expensive item either, and you do get that Kage's Lucky Pick to get that gold generation, and then get the blasting wand, and then the upgrade to the Deathfire Grasp. So it's a decently quick item that you might be able to rush or keep that Kage's Lucky Pick in your inventory to generate gold for you.
Yeah, the other thing is it's a little bit cheaper. It gives 20 more ability power now. The one thing it doesn't give is it doesn't give that 12 mana regen per 5. So of course that's huge, but it also has a larger cast range now, 750 from 650. And like I said before, the actual damage has been reduced for the most part. It's 25% plus 4% per 100 AP from 30% plus 3.5%. So until you get a lot of AP, it's actually lower than it used to be. But a lot of these champions that you're going to build are going to build a lot of AP, and so eventually it's going to be worthwhile. And 25% is still enough to get, add that great bonus to their already really stellar, burst combination, especially for Mordekaiser and champions like that. So, I mean, it is a great item. Now that it doesn't have mana, there's no reason not to buy it. And the other great thing that I think we're going to talk about later in terms of other items is that it gives 15% cooldown reduction. And cooldown reduction is a stellar stat for any mana champion especially, or any mage champion especially, and basically any champion throughout the game except an AD carry who probably just wants to auto-attack instead of use their skills. But I think we mentioned this before, is as a lot of people that are going to get blue buff, you don't really need the cooldown reduction because you're eventually going to pop a blue potion and going to get that blue buff, which will bring you to the max cooldown reduction on its own. But if you're a non-mana champion, you have the advantage of essentially giving that blue buff to your jungler, and then of course you're going to lose out on that cooldown reduction. But if you buy this Deathfire Grasp, you're going to gain some of that cooldown reduction right back, so it's not wasted, at least, as it might be on another mage champion.
Yep, so yeah, I mean, CDR basically any AP carry scales with CDR, so it's just a great stat to have, regardless of what champion you're using, besides, like AD carries, maybe.
Right.
As you said. So, I mean, yeah, like, basically, once you take out the mana, a lot of AP carries can really use every single part of this Deathfire Grasp, and it actually synergizes well with them, which is why we think more people should be building the Deathfire Grasp. And I mean, I've from what I've seen in games, people really haven't made the switch to building Deathfire Grasp more. I mean, I played a game as Katarina where I built a Deathfire Grasp, and I found that worked out pretty well because I was able to get that initial burst because I had a Deathfire Grasp and I also had a Gunblade. So those both did do a lot of damage and were able to help me burst down one champion so I could get those resets from the cooldowns from the passive.
Yeah, I think Tianzio no Akuma, who's like kind of one of the big Katarina players, probably the most popular one nowadays. Of course, Scar played a lot in Season 1, but not played so much Season 2. Tianzio no Akuma has kind of picked up the mantle of the #1 Katarina player, and they, after the change, started running Deathfire Grasp. I'm not sure if they're still running it, I imagine they are, but of course they were a big fan of the Gunblade as well. But it really just makes it so you can kill people, without relying too much on your ultimate. You want to get, some of that channel in, but even if you don't get the full channel in, you throw out that Gunblade proc, throw out the Deathfire Grasp proc, throw out Ignite, then Shunpo Bouncing Blade, and they're just about dead. And of course, once they're just about dead, then you can jump on the next person and, go through this whole line of attacks that's just going to kill the opposing team. So that is seriously a great strategy. I have also seen people in higher elos using Deathfire Grasp on Mordekaiser as soon as it came out, as soon as it was changed. That being said, lately I've seen like less Mordekaiser, and they've kind of fallen off again, despite the fact that he hasn't really gotten nerfed. And despite the fact that he was, considered one of the best AP champions going into Hanover a couple of months ago, he kind of has fallen off. But he's getting a lot of little buffs that people just don't realize, and one of them was Deathfire Grasp. So I expect we will see him in one of these tournaments coming into the future. Of course, he does have that susceptibility to ganks. But that being said, a lot of AP middle champions do have the same susceptibility, and as the meta goes now, you kind of just gank top over and over again. That's kind of the strategy.
Yep, so that is Deathfire Grasp, and that is our advertisement for Deathfire Grasp. Basically telling everybody to just use this item, but
just build it. If you're an AD carry, if you're in the jungle,
supports,
oh my goodness.
Supports. You build a GP10 for supports, right? Get that Kage's Lucky Pick, and then build a Deathfire Grasp.
I'm almost ashamed, but I played support Anivia. I built it on her. I played Mawakai in the jungle. I built it on him. Now, certainly, it's not always good. You have to realize you're paying a lot for ability power and that active, but and CDR. But at the same time, it is almost always useful. But since they have nerfed it, since it's no longer 30% of their current health, it's now reduced to 25%, and it scales better with AP. If you're not building AP, it's not quite as effective as it used to be.
Yep, so, but yeah, I mean, of course, obviously don't build it on everybody, but it is an excellent item for AP carries in general. And now I want to move on to the next new item that we want to look at, which is Athene's Unholy Grail, which is right up there on your screen. And this was, when was this put in? A few weeks ago? Was that less than a month ago?
I think it might have been in the same time as the Deathfire Grasp changes, something along those lines. But yeah, it's a relatively recent change. We have seen it used in tournaments. Certainly, anyone who previously built the Chalice of Harmony is now very tempted to build into this item. But tell me why you think that's a good or bad idea, Brian.
Well, I mean, first of all, it's really expensive.
Right.
It requires the Chalice, it requires the Fiendish Codex, and it requires the Amplifying Tomb, and then the combined cost too. And, I mean, if you need that much ability power and that much mana, you might want to just go for the Rod of Ages instead.
Right.
And, yeah, go ahead.
I think that's what we were talking about before. For about 140 more gold or thereabouts, you can buy a Rod of Ages, which is going to give you more life and more mana, not mana regeneration, and actually Rod of Ages only builds up to the same amount of AP as Athene's Holy Grail gives you initially. So if your real concern is, mana, magic resistance, and mana regeneration, for instance, if you felt like the whole game was about middle lane, then Athene's Holy Grail is really good. But once you get into team fights, once people start doing true damage through Ignite, start doing, attack damage, base damage from the AD carry, obviously, then it's not a really optimal item, in my opinion. And the other thing, of course, is gives that same 15% cooldown reduction that Deathfire Grasp does, but you're only building this on champions that really need mana. Like, you're only building this on an Anivia, perhaps maybe a Vagar, a Galio. All these champions that really like to spam their spells, all these champions that really want to waste their mana, really want to use it to clear waves, to just spam their spells all the time, and all those champions really rely on blue buff too. And if they have blue buff and they have blue potion, they have max CDR already. So I told you before, I think that might be a waste. Like, why do you really want that extra cooldown reduction? Now, of course, cooldown reduction, very awesome, and of course sometimes your blue buff is going to be stolen, sometimes you're not going to have it, a lot of times you're not going to have the blue potion either, which grants that 10% CDR, but if you do have that, then you're essentially wasting a big component of this item.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the main issue is that, I mean, it is a good item, it gives a lot of good stats, but really the stats that you're getting are stuff that would be useful in lane, but it's so expensive that, I mean, by the time you get it, you might be getting out of the lane phase already.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, actually, the thing is, when I saw that the unique passive that returns 12% of your max mana on a killer assist, the first thing I thought of was getting it on an APE. Because, I mean, like, imagine an APE who has a Deathfire Grasp and an Athene's Unholy Grail, just burst somebody down and then gets that mana back and, gets to use, I mean, you really just to get that burst damage and to get that mana back to help him out.
Yeah, I mean, actually, he probably might be an ideal champion to use it. The only thing is, like you said, it's really expensive, and he has a lot of other items to buy. Like with APE, you really want to buy Deathfire Grasp. You also really want to buy a Lichbane. So you have a ton of items that you need to buy to make APE viable. But that being said, I was not, like, when I read it, I was like, oh, okay, you get 12% of your mana on a killer assist. Well, once you get a killer assist, like, as an AP champion, you've done your job. Like, your job is to kill the first 1 or 2 people, and then you let the AD carry clean up the rest. Like, you're kind of done after that. You put out your burst, and you're happy. You are very happy. If you get kills, you're stoked. And you don't normally run out of mana. The only champions I run out of mana in team fights are sometimes Anivia, sometimes Karthus if I don't build Tier Goddess, and obviously, like you said, APE, he has an issue too because Alpha Strike just costs a ton. Now, they have been reducing that in recent patches. They have been reducing it to make it a little more viable, to make APE a little more viable. I'm not sure that's their intention, or if their intention is to make his jungle a little less mana intensive. But either way, like, he is getting better, but he's still one of those champions that is like, oh man, well, if I, Alpha Strike and kill someone, and then Alpha Strike and reactivate my ultimate and reactivate Wuju power, then I'm suddenly out of mana and I can't even, go forward with my battle. So it would help him in that sense, but it's just like he has so many other items he really, really needs to buy. I don't know if you can, expend money on that one in particular.
Although an APE in lane with Chalice would be a pain to deal with.
Well, APE is already a pain to deal with just because he can meditate. Like, a lot of AP champions just don't know how to deal with people with any sort of sustain. Like, Galio kind of has, like, semi-sustain, Gragas has semi-sustain, Swain has good sustain, obviously Vladimir has good sustain. But when you put those people middle, like, the opposing AP champion is like, what's going on? And, like, of course, Morgana has some sustain too, but her sustain isn't, like, stellar. It's just like, oh my goodness, she's suddenly gaining 15% back from spell vamp. What do I do? What do I do in this lane? I can't actually kill her because I'm going to waste too much waste too much mana before she actually dies. So I've had that experience where I'm just like, oh man, I can't kill Yi. If you don't have a champion that can stun all the time, you're like, shit, this guy can just meditate. He regains all of his life, and I'm out of mana, and he still has some, if he has blue buff or a lot of mana regeneration items.
Yeah, so... Yeah, I mean, APE is a pain to... I mean, the only thing is he's not exactly the most useful champion in team fights, despite being useful in lane. But, I mean, I was hoping, when I first saw this, I really just thought APE immediately because, I mean, part of me wanted to make APE more viable because, I mean, he's so strong in lane. If there's something to help his team fighting, he would become more viable. But, I mean, yeah, as you said, it takes a lot of items for him to be useful, so I mean, it'll be really expensive to actually get him to do anything in team fights, really.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing is, Doran's rings, Doran's blades have been nerfed. It was a couple of months back, but they both got nerfed in the sense that they give less hit points, I believe. I think that's where they got the major hits. And so, certainly, if you rush to Chalice of Harmony, you're not going to have protection from that burst damage, but you're going to have more sustain, and especially if you're a Yi who needs that mana regeneration, who's going against a, magic damage middle character. And all you really need is that mana regeneration, because mana regeneration through meditation essentially equals life, then you're pretty stoked building this item. So I can definitely see this as an early tier item for Yi to build and then maybe upgrade it later on, because he also does need the CDR. He should get the blue buff and he should get blue potions as team fights kind of evolve and erupt. But if he doesn't, then certainly he wants that extra CDR from this item. But like I said, yeah. Also wants Lichbane, also wants Deathfire Grasp. Gonna be kind of an issue, determining which one you get first. And none of them are cheap. They're all, 3K. This one's 29.50, I believe. Lichbane also over 3,000. All very expensive items that he has to build and to be really effective during team fights.
Yep. So I mean, besides that, I think we've only really seen Athene's Unholy Grail being built on Anivia, champions like that who. I mean, because not many people in Galio, not many people really built the Chalice of Harmony in the first place, and I mean, this helped out in the sense that it gave a way of upgrading the Chalice, but I mean, the stats in the Chalice weren't as useful. I mean, the stats that it gives aren't as useful to a late game AP champion either. Which it's an interesting item because of, I mean, it gives you mana back and stuff like that, but it gives you the CDR, but I don't know how I would feel building it just because it is so expensive for these stats.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like every other item has like an extra bonus to it. Like Rod of Ages, kind of grows over time and gives you that extra hit points and mana to survive that burst and to just give that extra mana in lane. Of course, Catalyst is always nice, and that extra AP over time. Death Cap, of course, synergizes with any other AP item you buy, which is stellar. Lichbane does the same thing. It suddenly turns all your AP items, into a secondary attack item, essentially doubles your AP ratios because suddenly your auto attacks are also doing AP damage. Well, that's not quite true. They're still doing physical damage for the most part, unless you're Fizz or someone like that. But it essentially doubles your AP ratios to do a lot of damage. So I don't feel like Athene's Holy Grail has the same bonus in the sense that Death Cap, Lichbane, or DFG does. Wherein you can get that early kill, where you can double your AP ratios, where you can build off your own AP ratios and get a significant bonus to anything else you've built. That being said, it is still a good item, and if you were previously building a Chalice of Harmony, like on a Galio or like on anyone else, then why not keep on doing it? So that's kind of my impression. And then, if you're building a Chalice of Harmony, previously you'd get to that 5-item build, and then you'd be like, oh, what do I build in my 6th item? Do I need to sell my Chalice of Harmony now? But now, instead of selling it, you're like, okay, well, I can just upgrade it, which is much better than selling in almost any case.
Alright, so I think we're going to move on to the last item on our list, the last new item. And this has actually been in use for a while now, and it's probably the least contentious of the items that we're talking about. But it's the Maw of Malmortius. Maw of Malmortius.
Malmortius is the way it's supposed to be pronounced, because I kept on saying Malmortius on streams, and people were like, no, that's not how you say it. Because it's actually named after a European player who I believe ran a cafe or something along those lines. And he said, his name was Malmortius. So it is Maw of Malmortius, and like you said, it is the least contentious, because if you build it, no one is going to complain. If you build Athene's Unholy Grail, if you build Deathfire Grasp, sometimes people might complain on your team. But if you build this item, there's really no downside to it. Hex Drinker has always been an incredible mid-game item. It gives you that shield, which helps you survive against that mid-game burst that a lot of champions have. So it's so essential there and so effective. But of course, previously it didn't have anything to build into endgame. But that being said, I had a lot of friends that built it anyway, before it even had anything to build into. But now that it does, now that it has actually something like decent to build into with the Maw of Malmortius, then there's really no argument against building it on those, especially those bruisers that don't really scale with attack speed. If you're just building for attack damage, then it is a beastly item indeed.
Yeah, and I actually want to contend your point that people won't complain if you build Maw of Malmortius, because once I was on a team that we wanted to run a kill lane, but it somehow ended up, because we wanted to counter mid too or something like that, we ended up with an all AD team, and we're like, oh no, we screwed up, we had an all AD team. But the other top lane ended up building a Maw of Malmortius for some reason, and he realized his mistake when he looked at our team, and then basically he got flagged for it because he built a Maw of Malmortius against an all AD team. But I mean, those are unique situations. But yeah, I mean, in general, it's a good item to build because it provides magic resist and it provides that shield, which is excellent.
Right. I mean, if you're top lane and you're going against a double AP meta, then you buy it. There's really no question asked. There's no reason not to. Almost as any AD champion top lane against double AP, because it's going to help you in lane, and that's going to also help you against that AP middle champion. And in certain instances, it actually could be a triple AP where they have an AP in the jungle, whether it's Fiddle, whether it's Maokai, whether it's a Mumu who's catching on now because he got that little bonus. And even Alistar does a significant amount of AP damage. So it is great in all those respects. But mainly I feel like the Hex Drinker is the key component that makes it so awesome in lane, because suddenly you're going against a Vladimir, he hemoplagues you, he thinks he's about to kill you, and then you get that shield, you turn around and kill him. And it is, a stellar item all around the books. Now, I don't know if you run down the actual cost efficiency of it, but I feel like the cost efficiency, no matter how you break it down, is going to be misleading, because it gives you extra damage while you're lower in life, because while you're in lower life it gives you that shield. It's essentially like heal baiting without carrying summon or heal and giving everyone that little impression. Oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to trick you. You build the item. They don't necessarily know that you built the item, and then they're like, oh man, that shield just popped up, and now I have to do a couple more hundred damage to actually kill them. It is terrible. It's a terrible thing to go against in lane if you're an AP champion, and it's great if you can actually build it, and it saves your life unless you turn the tides of the battle.
Yeah, and the thing is, AP champions rely on their burst damage to take you down, and if the shield saves you from that burst damage, they're not going to be able to do anything while you attack them back. So, I mean, it's really effective against those bursty champions because it helps prevent them from taking you down with their burst.
Yeah, I mean, certainly if you're a bruiser going against an AP top and they've suddenly wasted their ultimate and that ultimate has been completely counteracted by your Hex Drinker, you're just like, oh, I am in the lead now. I got you covered. And it's just really great because a lot of champions were kind of on the verge of being viable, but didn't have any items to build into, and those champions include Renekton. All of the AD caster champions is how kind of Riot referred to them. Renekton, Pantheon. Who else kind of falls into that lane? Riven, but not Riven to the same extent, because Riven still scaled so hard off of just straight AD that she could go Bloodthirster. So mainly, yeah, Renekton has been seeing more competitive play, and I think that's in large part because of this item. Because previously, if you wanted a magic resistance attack item, you would go to Wit's End, but as Renekton, you're like, I don't need that attack damage. Why would I want that item? I'm not going to, get those procs quite as quick. I'm not going to attack quite as much. I'm really just going in there to WQE really quickly, and I'm getting out. So this is kind of the counterpart to Wit's End. That's certainly more expensive, but it's not so niche as to only refer to certain champions that really like attacking a lot.
Yep, so, I mean, it's a good item, and I don't think there's any debate about it being a good item. I think, in general, it's accepted as being good against AP champions in general, and a good upgrade from the Hex Drinker. And, I mean, the Hex Drinker is a good item to get by itself as well. So, yeah, I mean, really nothing much else to say there, I guess. Any comments about the Maw? Any more comments? I mean?
Oh, I would just say one champion that I forgot was Lee Sin, which my friend Ninwalk always built on. He built Hex Trigger for, since it came out. He's like, this item is so awesome. And he was right. Hex Trigger was awesome before you could even upgrade it. But now that you can, it's even that much more awesome. And of course, Lee Sin has always been, he's not really an AD caster champion, but he does have really good AD ratios on all of his skills, and he doesn't really need to build AD or attack speed because he gets 40% from his passive essentially, which has been nerfed lately from 50% to 40%, but it's still up there, so you still don't see Lee Sin's building Wit's End or anything of the like, so it's a nice item for him as well.
Alright, so I think that covers it for the items. You want to go on to the next topic that we want to talk about?
My God.
The meta?
I would love to, because items are great, but they are a very, very small portion of the meta. There's a lot of other stuff that we have to get to rely on to talk about the meta. But I would like to say, because you actually have us all recorded, and I think we'll put up your version on YouTube. But for my version, we don't have the introductions. I'm Sotere. I'm awesome. 2100 elo, something around those lines. Riot stole it from me. I'm gonna kill those motherfuckers. Zero, not quite as awesome, but he's Korean, makes up for it. Also on here. And we are generally shoutcasters. We do community matches sometimes. I've kind of fallen off as of late as we've both moved, but we're going to be casting for the GG Classic coming up in a couple weeks, so stay tuned for that. But there's other very interesting and important stuff about us that I'm not going to get into right now. But I'd like to, just send out another shout out in case we don't have the proper recorded versions on our computers as of this moment.
Yep, so that is us. Sotere really underselling me right there, calling me
underselling you. I told you. I said you were Korean.
Oh,
you barely speak the language, as far as I know. That was an oversight. I was trying to.
Hey, I can speak it. I can speak it. You haven't heard me speak Korean before.
I've never heard you speak Korean. Let's hear some.
No, it's my secret weapon. I can't. I actually wanted to do something.
Every time we talk about it, you're like, "Oh, I can speak it, but I'm not going to do it now."
No, I actually wanted to run this by you, but I wanted to do a community shoutcasting thing where I would shoutcast completely in Korean, and you would do it in English, and we would just do a dialogue, if it can be called that. Basically, two monologues going on at the same time.
That would be awesome. I would just start talking louder and louder than you. I'd be like, I don't know what this guy is saying. He's terrible. Don't listen to him. He doesn't know anything about item builds or the meta.
And I'd be off talking about, some kill going off on the other side of the map.
That's a great thing, since I don't control the camera. I would be watching my own thing. You would actually be watching the action. I would be watching, like, people in the jungle killing minions, because I love watching people kill minions. So that would be my whole shtick. I would be watching minion kills, you would be watching player kills, you'd be talking in Korean, I'd be talking in, good old Queen's English, and we'd go from there. But anyways, back to the meta, back to the topic at hand, because we always have a lot of fun when we're chatting, when we're casting, love to do it, but this is serious business. This is like serious business here. Let's get back. Right. What is our next topic of conversation?
Well, I think one thing we really like to talk about is the bot lane. And how it seems to be pretty much stuck in the whole AD carry and support right now. But, I mean, I think we're both of the opinion that that's really not... I mean, it might not even be optimal how a lot of other options are possible, and it might even be better for that bot lane.
I agree. And I would like to say I'm drinking a little Bacardi Light with some mint, some raspberries. It's a nice mojito here. So I feel like a lot of alcoholic sponsors are kind of missing the boat here. I mean, everyone plays video games and everyone drinks while they're playing video games. Brian can attest to this. ZeroCardinality. He's over there doing research grants, but everyone who's in college and everyone who's studying drinks quite a bit. So you guys are missing the boat. If you want to jump on the boat, get in contact with us. All four of you who are watching, if any of you have contacts with Bacardi or any sort of beer company, any sort of vodka company, any sort of tequila company. Actually, I'm kind of an equal opportunity drinker. So any sort of any company who wants to sponsor the Meta Musings, get in touch with this guy. Regardless, bottom lane. Like I said before, a lot of people are like, oh, right now is the optimal way to play. But I bet, probably 6-7 months ago, people were like, oh, this is the optimal way to play. Let's send Ashe middle. Because that's what people used to do. And, Ashe would lose to, 90% of the matchups there. Of course, she could be careful. She could outplay a lot of the matchups. But she would lose most of them. So now we have this thing where, okay, let's send the AD carry bottom with the support. And for the most part, that works because AD carries are generally weaker in the laning phase. You really want to get them that, free farm. You want to get them all those items, and then they show up around 20 minutes with their Infinity Edge, with their Trinity Force, and then they go to town on people. And that is great, but, it doesn't mean that's the way to play. And we've seen in tournaments, we see Urgot come out a lot, and Urgot's like, oh, hey, I'm not an actual traditional AD carry. I don't build Infinity Edge. I don't build a Fan Dancer. I build straight defense, and I just friggin' smack you in the face. I build straight cooldown reduction. I build Frozen Heart and GA and a Brutalizer, and suddenly you just die. And now, of course, he's taken some nerfs in the recent patches, but he's not even an AD carry. Like an AD carry, the reason they get that name is because you carry them through the beginning portions of the game, and they carry you when the game is coming to a close. Then they start doing all their damage later on in the game. In the middle team fights, they're actually not that effective until they get their Infinity Edge and their Phantom Dancer or their Trinity Force. They're not super strong. But I think the thing Brian and I in particular have been talking about is I think we like the kill lanes from MTWNA, a picture of a goose. They've kind of gone through a couple of the name changes. But one thing they brought out was Leona Jarvan kill lane, which was awesome. It was really fun to watch, and all the really high-ranking teams were terrified of it. When they would go against MTWNA, they'd be like, okay, let's ban Leona Jarvan. And they did that for a long time, and then, MTWNA switched up their bottom lane players, and suddenly, the pro teams weren't, all the other teams that they faced against weren't quite as afraid of that combination. But it was really effective. And, one thing to say is I love MTWNA, I love a picture of Goose, whatever name they want to go by, I love them as players. I think they're really unique and innovative, but I don't think they're, really at the same level as, Xpecial and Chaos and Double Lift and Chowster. I don't think they're up there, but they, found a different combination to throw bottom lane that would just steamroll games. So I think what we want to talk about is what other combinations can you send bottom lane, or if that is still a viable solution to send combinations that can dominate bottom lane and not really have that AD carry late game.
Yeah, and so, one kill lane I really want to mention is Pantheon Leona, because I feel like it's just so powerful, because when you have that Spear Harass, you have the Pantheon shield block, which helps during trades, and if you want to kill them, you just have Pantheon jump in, and that's not even a skill shot. You just jump in and stun them. It keeps them in place while Leona can go in with her Zenith Blade, and Pantheon can use his spells or just auto attack to get that the Sunlight proc. And then Leona stuns, and then Pantheon gets that second Sunlight proc, and that's just a lot of damage, and the AD carry or the support, whichever one you decide to target, can't do anything in that time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really easy to start, too. It's not like Leona Jarvan where you have to land a skill shot or something like that, or the knock-up from Jarvan to initiate it. You just jump on them with Pantheon's stun, and you basically just chunk them for a ton of damage.
Right. And yeah, I think, that's something that a lot of people are like, oh man, well, you don't have to really consider skill shots and all that sort of stuff when you're talking about balance. But you actually do, because skill shots are a lot harder to hit. When you have a point-and-click stun, like Pantheon does, that, can lead into a Zenith Blade, which is it's not super hard to hit. It's actually they've increased the hitbox, and I think they've increased the speed of the Zenith Blade as well. It's easier to hit than it used to be, but still, a lot of pro players would miss that Zenith Blade. But when you have someone that can get an instant stun on, you talk and you say, okay, well, I'm going to get the stun now as Pantheon. You lead that up into a Zenith Blade, and you have like almost a stun lock for the next 3 seconds between, Zenith Blade and the Q and the ultimate all going down, and just a ton of extra damage coming in from that support position. Kind of ancillary damage in the sense that, it's through her passive. She's not actually doing it, but she's allowing Pantheon to do the damage. It is really great. So that is good. The other thing I want to talk about, and certainly if you want to, expand more on that particular combination, I'm down to hear it. I haven't seen it too much in play, but the other one I've seen to really great effect is Volibear and basically anyone, but I've seen Volibear and Lee Sin.
Yeah, I mean, Volibear is great. He
really
just runs
well.
out of the bush, flips you over, and you're dead. I mean, it's basically what happens. I mean, and Volibear actually works well as a support because, I mean, he just builds some health items and, is a tank, basically, in team fights. So that works fine. Well, one of the things that we talked about before was how to be an effective support, you don't not only have to have a good lane phase, but you also have to have a good team fight presence. And a lot of unconventional supports have good lane phases, for example, maybe Gangplank, but I don't feel like Gangplank has that same teamfight presence as other champions. I mean, he has that ultimate, and
the ultimate's pretty big.
It is, but I mean, I guess that's true. Maybe that was a bad example, but I mean, but there are some unconventional supports that are maybe like Heimerdinger.
Right. That's a good example of unconventional support that's not super in team fights.
So, yeah, he has that blind, but you have to land it, and so it's not as good in team fights. But Volibear can still be useful in team fights, and in the kill lanes with Leona in them. Leona is a support already, so you have your support and you have your person taking the farm already. One thing I want to mention about the Pantheon Leona lane, going back to that, is if you manage to, say, take small golems and reach level 2 first, I mean, that's just that's really powerful because you have Zenith Blade and you have the Shield of Daybreak, and you have the I forgot what Pantheon stun is called, but you have that and the Spear Throw. So you basically have a combo ready, and Pantheon comes to lane, throws out a spear to do a lot of damage to the AD carry, and then after you reach level 2, jump on them and kill them. If they know about that and are really careful, you can, just farm up in safety, basically. And once you reach more levels, too, you're basically gonna get the other bot lane really scared, and you're gonna push them to tower. And Pantheon can dive tower very easily because of his passive, so you can still get kills even if they just hide under tower.
Right. His W is called Aegis of Zionia. Not that I know that, I actually looked it up on Wikipedia, League of Legends Wikipedia. It's kind of funny because people make fun of other people for not knowing all the skill names and not knowing all the ranges. But I was watching like a Saint Vicious video log the other day, and he was like, "Oh yeah, man, Hecarim has really good." I think it was Hecarim has really good, movement speed. He has 320, which is like highest in the game almost. I think some people have 325. I was like, yeah, a lot of people have 325. Some people have 330 too. Well, he didn't mention that. Pantheon and I think Yi both have 330. So, there are 99 champions. It's hard to remember, 4 skills for each. It's hard to remember, especially when you're in the moment and casting. So, if you're listening to people that don't have it quite on, might want to give them a break. If you know it, like, certainly props to you. You probably played that champion or whatnot. But a lot of the casters, I main like 2 champions. Everyone at GG Chronicle gives me shit. They're like, "Oh, so you know how to play Janna and Udyr, right?" And maybe Corki. Actually, everyone gives me credit for playing Corki, even though I'm like not an incredible Corki player. But I appreciate them giving me credit. Regardless, skill names are hard to remember. That being said, that is Aegis of Zionia. The one thing about kill lanes, regardless of who you are, if you do get behind, you might stay behind just because they're the enemies have the ability to poke you, and poke is certainly detrimental to your cause of trying to kill them, and your only option, once they start poking you, is okay, well, I'm going to rush in now and kill you. But if you do get behind at some point, the poke is too strong. Once you rush in, they can still kill you. So you do have to be careful about that. And I feel like a lot of people don't want to try out the kill lane because they're like, oh my god, we just got absolutely, stomped bottom lane when we tried this kill lane because they got an advantage through ganks or whatnot. But that's another thing. A lot of kill lanes I see, I see like a Lee Sin, Volibear, a Leona, Jarvan go bottom lane, and they don't ward. Just because you're a kill lane doesn't mean you don't have to ward against, possible invasions from the enemy jungler. You still definitely have to ward. You need to do that. You need protection, especially if you're a kill lane, because when you're a kill lane, you have to get into melee range generally to, execute your kill combination, which means you're even further on their side of the river to get that kill. And when you go, past that point of no return, you don't want the jungler sneaking behind you, because suddenly, it's a double kill for their side, and they just completely take over that lane. So in no case is it not essential to have those wards protecting the bottom lane, but I would say, even in a kill lane, even though both of you really want to, build that Doran Shields or Doran's Blade or, build boots first, in no other case is it as important to actually build those, or rather buy those wards and, set up a area of protection around you. Because, like, when I'm Janna, sometimes I can get away from bad warding. I can throw out a Howling Gale, I can slow them with Zephyr, I can shield my AD carry, and we can get away even without wards. But if you're a melee champion and you're like all in, you're like going after them and you're like, oh man, I just want to bite off their motherfucking heads. If you're going after them, then you're like not even going to notice the jungler coming in, and then you're not even going to be, a flash isn't even going to save you from them. So you absolutely have to have those wards if you are a kill lane.
Yep. And that's kind of going back to how you really want one of the champions in the kill lane to be a supporty champion. So you want the one buying the wards and really to be effective without getting the farm. So, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, kill lanes aren't really the only things that we discussed about lanes that might be effective at bot. And I think it's just, I think that's the lane maybe with the most possibilities because there are two champions. And I mean, kill lanes are one possibility that a lot of people know about and people have been running, but I think there are other ways to go about without having an AD carry there.
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, we're going to focus most on that because there's two champions, so that's 2 out of 5 people down there. Just by, numbers alone, we're going to focus on how do we change that lane. But one thing you and I have been talking about is the double support meta, and I've seen certain people run that in high elo. I don't know that we want to get into that now, but I don't know how much you do want to get into that. Bottom lane is something you can change up, but you can also change up the jungle roles, the middle roles, the top roles, into who is getting what amount of farm. And the meta has been shifting, regardless of whether we're going to talk about it right now or not. The meta has been shifting in the sense that middle has suddenly been champion upraised. Like, middle, how you win middle is not necessarily getting kills in the competitive scene. It's how you control the wraith camps. Like, you control theirs, you control yours, whatever you control. Like, that is how you determine a victory or not, because that's like a lot more farm you can be getting every single minute.
Yep. I think what you're talking about, Bear, deserves a lot more discussion. So I think we should leave that off until the next time we do this. We do our Meta Musings. But I mean, that is just a preview. And in terms of basically the distribution of farm, like as you said, the jungler doesn't necessarily have to take all of his own jungle farm. He can give it up to his own middle and give up his wraiths and maybe even other stuff. And I mean, he already gives up the blue buff to middle already, and maybe even red buff to the top or something like that. So
worst case, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I remember I had one game where it was the one game that we tried out our double support, but then I just ended up going it just ended up going to a transitioning to a more traditional meta. But basically, giving top red from the beginning, the first red, can just help them snowball that lane very hard. And because it could be just really useful in terms of early harass and just winning that lane from the get-go.
Yeah, actually, we've seen that in tournaments. I don't know. I think, yeah, it was M5, and like the most a lot of pro teams want to do is they like will switch lanes. They'll be like so excited. They'll be like, "Oh man, okay, we got a super secret strategy. We're gonna send our top lane to bottom. No one will know what's going on." Despite the fact that this has been going on for like 2 years, like they still think this is a great strategy that sometimes is going to work, and it does sometimes work. But more, I would say about, probably equal amount of times it backfires. Because they have a better champion at it, because you are perhaps your blue side, and you're like, oh, I still want to swap, despite the fact that we may be giving up dragon control. So they send a single person down there, they're like, oh, well, now they have 2 people down there, now they take a 5-6 minute dragon, they get that advantage, then they swap back up top, and now they have an advantage over the top lane as well. So like pro teams are like so excited about this, like, oh, we're gonna pick Yorick, we're gonna send him bottom. They can't do anything about this. But one thing that I have seen work relatively well, I want to say it was M5, sent a Gangplank bottom. Now, I'm not sure it was M5. They sent a Gangplank bottom on blue side, gave him red buff early, and he was going against an Olaf, and I was like, man, that is such a terrible matchup. Olaf just absolutely stomps Gangplank, puts all that true damage from Reckless Swing. I was like, oh, this is going to be terrible. And I was watching it most of the time, and I was like, oh, that Olaf is just stomping him, just absolutely stomping him. And then I looked down, or I didn't even look down at some point, I just saw First Blood, Gangplank had killed him. Just because that red buff was just enough to allow him to kill him. Of course, Gangplank's passive also helped in slowing the Olaf down when he was trying to escape. But he got that first blood because he got essentially the first 4 levels with red buff, which is such a huge advantage. Basically, it turns around almost every single lane. Like, every single, auto attack damage lane champion, anyone who can benefit from red buff, if you benefit from it, then you're suddenly going to win your lane even against unfavorable matchups, because you get a little experience from that. You're probably going to hit level 2 first, but more importantly, you have that true damage, that slow, all of that coming in for your champion, which is so huge. So I agree, that's a very important part of the game that people haven't really, accounted for. Of course, you want it to be on your jungler too, so his ganks are more effective, and whenever I give away that red buff as a jungler, I'm like, oh man, I go for a gank, and I'm like, if I had red buff, I would have got a kill there. But it is, but the thing with, a jungler is, you go in for 1 gank when you have red buff. That's it. That's all you do, essentially. I mean, sometimes maybe 2 ganks, but any more than that, you're, being too optimistic or you're spending too much time on ganks. So you're spending, maybe 1/10 of the time that you have red buff actually engaging against the opposition, whereas someone in lane is getting that advantage for the whole 3.5 minutes, 4 minutes, however long it lasts. So it's certainly advantageous to a team to give it up to someone else, especially if you are a jungler who's not going to gank a ton in that first red buff route. And that's actually kind of the jungler that's more attuned to this meta. Like a Nautilus, like an Alistar. Yeah, I mean, red buff really helps with your ganks, but you're more, CC related based on your own skills than you are CC related based on that red buff, because you actually have, if you're a Nautilus, you have terrible, terrible attack speed. If you're Alistar, you're more focused on, getting that headbutt pulverized combination perfected. So that is certainly a thing to think about in the meta. And like you said, this deserves a couple hours of discussion, as opposed to just a kind of glancing 5 minutes of being like, oh, well, the pro teams are doing it good. They have some new strategies, but there's so much more that could be done. And I think M5 is the only team that's really kind of on the ball, oh, actually, if we're going to get red buff top lane, or if we're going to give red buff to our jungler, let's let our bottom lane or our middle lane get blue buff. It's just let's use all of the resources that are available to us right now. right now. Let's use them as soon as they're available to us. Let's not wait for our jungler to waste 2 minutes to get to that blue buff or to get to that red buff. Let's take everything we can immediately. You know, despite the fact it might hurt our jungler, it's going to help our lanes that much more.
Yeah, and one last thing before we end, I want to point out is that the red buff could also be useful on the mid lane, even though the mid lane really isn't seen as an auto-attacking champion. Getting that slow on the enemy champion can really help you win your lane, and just, I mean, if you're going to use your auto attacks to harass, or if you use your auto attacks at all, it's really useful. So the mid lane can use that red buff too, and it might even be, depending on the champions in question, it might even be better for the mid lane to get the red buff than the blue buff. I mean, yeah, I mean, one thing I was thinking about was maybe if you have like an Annie who has a long auto attack range, gonna get that slow, and then use that auto attack harass a lot. You might want the red buff more.
Yeah, I mean, I have not thought about that as much. Yeah, one thing I have thought about is like, oh my goodness, if you ever like gank middle or gank top as a jungler and you give up those double buffs, it is so devastating to your lane opponent, or to your lane mate rather, because their lane opponent has such a huge advantage. But that being said, I've given away my blue buff early to my AP middle, and they can't do that too much with it. In a lot of cases, yeah, they can spam their spells, but their spells will still have cooldown. They're not going to be too dominant. But with that red buff, I think that makes a difference. And like you said, it depends on the champion. If it's Annie, really good because that auto attack range. Anivia has really good auto attack range. Someone like Orianna, especially because she has decent auto attack. She has that, you know, bonus passive from her auto attack damage. It gives some of her AP towards her damage, but also especially she gets a shield. So the one thing you don't really like auto attacking if you're going to get that creep damage back, Orianna can deal with that because she can shield herself and go to town essentially with her auto attacks and dealing that extra damage from her passive and from red buff. So there's a lot of people that certainly do benefit from that red buff. And you know, I haven't really thought about like, oh, let's give this red buff to middle early on. But that can be a big advantage, especially if you're like someone with auto attack range against perhaps someone who does not have a ranged attack. If you're going against a Kassadin, a Fizz, for instance, you know, champions who generally are not great early game, but if you don't, you know, really force them out of lane, they come back and bite you in the butt. Like Fizz and Kassadin, great assassins that don't have to have too much farm to jump on you and kill you, but if you let them get a little bit of farm early game, they will go ahead and do that. But if you have that red buff, not only are you going to get that farm early game and force them out of their farm, but you might pick up a kill and might steamroll the lane the other way.
Alright, so I think that's all for today.
Okay.
Thanks for watching. Remember, you can always catch us next time for the Meta Musings, which this was our first show, so we're going to be trying to do this weekly, and I think we're going for the Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern time slot. So that's 6 p.m. Pacific time. We'll probably post on Reddit and Facebook announcing when we're gonna go live. Probably a couple hours before. We didn't announce this one because we were unorganized and trying to get everything together at the last minute. But hopefully you enjoyed the show. Watch us next week, Friday, 9 p.m. Eastern time. And thanks for watching. I'm ZeroCardinality. And
I am Sotere. I'm so happy for the few people that came to watch us. Hopefully we'll post this up on Facebook. I'm counting on Zero to do that because he does all the extra grunt work because he is awesome and I'm kind of lazy. But I felt like it was a good talk that we had here. And I think, as time goes on, as we get into the more evolved talks, as we get into this possible ultimate meta-changing talks where we go, double support, triple bot lane, all this sort of stuff. It'll get even more exciting.
We started tame with the items.
Right, we did start tame, but we are going to get more exciting, guaranteed. Guaranteed for all you out there who are like, well, I like items, but I really like just changing the game because I'm awesome. Tune in next week. That's when we'll be changing the game.
We're gonna change the game. I guarantee you.
Oh yeah.
We're gonna change how this entire game is played. You won't even recognize the meta once we're done with it.
I agree.
All right. So thanks for watching
get to
again,
that.
and see you next week.
Have a good night, guys.